This show is a proud member of the Nerdy Legion Podcast Network. Get more at nerdylegion.com. Enjoy the show.
This is Brightside Home Theater. Hey, home theater nerds. Welcome to the Brightside Home Theater Podcast, the podcast that's all about the sights, the sounds, the scenes. And hey, for my longtime listeners, we're changing it up. A little bit of a format change here. Some big news here. I'm surprising you with this. Everybody have a great weekend? I had a great weekend. I had such a good weekend that I came up with a new idea. So, typically, my longtime listeners know that my podcast is typically about a movie. I break down some scenes, then I talk about listener comments, and I talk about movies and scenes, and it's an hour, roughly, podcast. But when I set out to do this podcast, I only wanted to do basically a 20 to 30 minute podcast breaking down the scenes of a movie, the bright side, the fun stuff that we do in our theater. But what ended up happening is, of course, the listeners chime in. I love interacting with you guys. You guys give me great comments. You give me great scenes. And it turns the podcast into a longer podcast. So instead of putting out one long podcast, I'm going to break it up to two podcasts. And this podcast is going to be called Takeover Tuesdays. I do a drum roll, but it's in the title of the show that you're going to see before you even hear this. But yeah, Takeover Tuesdays. Listeners take over Brightside Home Theater Podcast. I can thank my daughter for that name. I went up and asked everybody what would be a good name. What do I come up with? Because I already have Brightside Chat for home theater, so I can't do that. And she came, because it's going to be coming out on Tuesdays, Takeover Tuesdays, where the listeners take over Brightside Home Theater. I thought it was great. We're running with it. Welcome to Takeover Tuesdays, where we just talk about you guys, what you have to say, and I'll comment and we'll go back and forth. Listeners, take over the show, so check it out. No video, just audio, having fun. Listener comments. We have a bunch to get to today about everything that went on over the weekend because of I asked a question last week, but we'll get to that in a minute. Tons to get to, so without further ado, my name's DJ, if you don't know that already. This is the Brightside Home Theater Podcast that now comes to you twice a week. And welcome everybody. Thank you to my 14 patrons over there on Patreon. If you want to support this podcast that now comes to you twice a week, you can do so by going to my website, brightsidehometheater.com. And you can click on the big red button and it'll take you to Patreon, or you can just go directly to patreon.com/Brightside Home Theater. And you donate as little as $1 a month or up to whatever you'd like. And all monies go directly into the podcast. Really appreciate the money that I'm getting in, the support that I'm getting from my patrons. And I also appreciate my support from all of my followers on Twitter, on YouTube. It's only been a few days since I last recorded, so I haven't picked up any Twitter followers since then, so I have no new Twitter followers to add. So thank you to everybody for supporting the podcast. It's what makes me want to sit down here every week, whether you support it by just retweeting me or liking me on YouTube or Twitter or whatever. But the comments, the support, it's what makes me want to sit down here. When I first sat down by myself almost 2 years ago, I was having fun. I knew I would get out to a few people, but it has been overwhelming, but a lot of fun. So much fun. The support. So, speaking of support, I would like to ask all of my listeners, anybody listening right now to this podcast, please go on to YouTube. The link will be in the show notes. This isn't for me, okay? This is for #Dork Podcast. They don't need they're a great podcast. They're killing it. They're killing it. Their numbers for podcasting are through the roof. They are actually, if I look at some of the metrics, their numbers are as good, if not better, than like HT Guys or AV Rant, and they all have higher ratings than I do, of course. But this #Dork, they've got a little bit of an issue over there on YouTube. They're trying to grow their brand on YouTube. They're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. They've been stuck at like 981. I think they're at 981 right now, but they've been just shy of that 1,000 for a little while. But let me tell you why I want you to support them. They're the all-in-one. They're #Dork. They're great guys. Rich Keefe, Ryan Davey, two guys grew up together, and they talk all things dork. They cover everything, and they're so much fun to listen to. They're one of the reasons I got into podcasting to begin with. And started podcasting with my buddy John is because of these guys. When I first got into podcasting, I was like, okay, somebody told me, I think it was about Rogan, and I'd heard about Dork. And it was Rich Keefe. He's the one that runs it, #Dork, that is. And you can follow him on Twitter, #Dork Podcast. You can follow him on YouTube, #Dork Podcast. They're on Instagram. They're all over the place. But anyways, so I was listening to sports radio. Rich Keefe is a sports radio personality in the Boston area, and he kept talking about it on his radio show that he had a podcast. I was like, let me check it out. I started listening to that. It's probably one of the first podcasts that I started listening to. Anyways, let me shorten this up a bit. Started listening to Rogan, and then I'm like, hey, this podcasting thing's pretty cool. I started listening to Home Theater Podcast. That's when I learned about AV Rant and HT Guys and all of this. I was late to the game for podcasting. Anyways, #Dork had some events where you'd come out to the Idle Hands Brewery, and you can go and see them. They did a live podcast, and you got to meet the guys. Well, I went to the first one. My wife went with me. This was quite a few years ago. My wife went with me, and I'm a fairly shy guy, okay? And there is Rich Keefe, the radio personality, sitting up there at the front desk, talking with, at the time, it was 6 other guys hanging out. They did a podcast. They had what they called the Triforce. And I was like, they're all local guys, but I was like, you know what? I was leaving them alone and whatever. But I wanted to say hi, introduce myself and whatever, but I was shy. So I left when everything was over. We hung out there for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, I think it was. And we get to the parking lot, and my wife looks at me. I'm sitting in my truck, and she goes, why didn't you go up to him and say hi? And I was like, you know me. I'm not like my brother. He's like that. He'll go up to anybody, say hi, blah, blah, blah. I'm shy. I'm like, people like to be left alone, whatever. She goes, just go. You'll be mad at yourself if you don't do it. So I did. I got out of my truck, went back into the building, stood there hanging out. He was talking. Rich Keefe was talking to a couple other people. And then he turns to me and he says, hey, how you doing? And he goes, I'm Rich. I'm like, I know who you are. Blah, blah. I won't get into the whole conversation, but he couldn't have been more pleasant. He couldn't have been a better guy. He's just a normal guy, like we all are, right? And I was like, it was just so awesome. And then I met him again at a Comic-Con. I've met him quite a few times since then, but it was another interaction a year later or so, where I was talking about getting into podcasting, and he was like, do it, and he was so supportive, so great, got into podcasting. And my first one was very similar, kind of a crossover to his. They do talk comics over there, but I was like, you know what? I wanted to apologize and stuff, but he was like, no, there's so much room for this. He was so supportive. And if it wasn't for that interaction, if it wasn't for how great he was. And I know there's a lot of great people. The world is filled with mostly great people. Unfortunately, Twitter seems to focus on the negative people, and that's why we came out with Brightside Chat. But anyways, that's another segue. Rich was so awesome. Ryan was awesome. I talked to him, met him a few times. They are awesome guys. And if my little tiny podcast over here, if I can get them 19 subscribers on YouTube, that would be awesome. So this is my audio only podcast. I may repeat this later. I may put this out later as another push in my YouTube podcast. But if you guys can go over there, it doesn't cost you anything. You just go to YouTube, search #DorkPodcast, and hit subscribe. What does it bother? I mean, and trust me, if you listen to me and you like me, you're going to love these guys. Very professional podcast, very tight. It's an hour long and they talk about all sorts of subjects. I have no doubt in my mind that you would love that podcast. But even if you don't, just hit subscribe. Get them to 1,000. That would be awesome for them. Help them grow their brand. Because I think with YouTube, once you get over 1,000, it's another level. I think you can monetize and stuff. And speaking of monetize, I got completely demonetized last week from my YouTube because of all the audio that I used, which was great. I don't care. I mean, that's fine. I'm so far away from being monetized on YouTube. It's not even funny. But these guys, they would love to get to 1,000. I know they've been trying for a little while, but it's so hard when you're talking to your own listeners and telling people to go there and subscribe. They probably already are. So if you guys could do it, I would really appreciate that. They probably won't even know I'm doing this. I don't care. I just want to see them get up there. That would be awesome. So enough on that. Let's get to you guys this week. We had a lot to talk about. It was such an exciting weekend because I put out a podcast with a question in it, and it's like sound or video, or sound or picture. What is more important? So let's get to the comments that came flooding in. For me, it's considered flooding, but I had so much fun with it. So first up, we have on Twitter, we have The One Shark says, sound, since it tells you everything that is going on outside the frame. That's a great point from the One Shark. Because yeah, you're right. It does. It fills you in on information that you can't even see. So that's great point right there. We also have Martin Anderson on Twitter. Sound. I have since my preteen years been into sound. Of course, the picture is important too, but sound just sets the mood. Just imagine a beautiful New Zealand pan shot from Lord of the Rings, but with no sound, or with crickets instead of the score. It's a whole different mood. And he's right. It is. And I've seen examples like that in the past where, like on just to point this out, people have done that. They take a scene and they'll just throw in different sounds and how you can either be scared or excited or nothing or bored out of your mind just by the sound changing in the exact same scene. Next up, we have Easy Home Theater says, close, but I have to go with sound. I kind of have a thing for bass. And yeah, that's a great point, Easy Home Theater. It's such a great point because that's where everybody loves the bass. And it's like that visceral, that feel, that punch, that whatever, the vibrations. I don't care how good your picture is. You can't feel it. You can't feel the picture. There is no feeling. So if you have sound, you have good sound, and it has that visceral, it literally is going to punch you. How is that not better than just, oh, wow, look at my 8K picture with all of these pixels. Yeah, that's nice. Don't get me wrong. You need a picture. Otherwise, it's called an audio podcast, which I'm doing today. See how important sound is? Imagine if I had no sound. Kind of boring, isn't it? That little bit of gap there. You're wondering, and as soon as the sound goes away, you're wondering, did he stop? Did it break? Did my player stop? Did I change over? What happened? Next up, WV Brew says, at BrightsideHT, sound for me, it's not even that close. Most pictures in modern film are all well done. Sound, however, especially immersive sound, is still far more elusive and sometimes dumbed down to a less dynamic mix for home. So when you get a great immersive track, it's a treat. It's another great example. When we have bad sound, we know it. And I'm going to comment a little bit more on this later on because you'll see what I mean. But we all know the movies that don't have that good of sound. And I mean, I'm not saying you want a bad picture, but what is more important to you? What can you get by with? You can get by with an okay picture. I'm not saying a bad picture, but you can get by with an okay picture. But if you just have okay sound, you notice it. And we want great sound. And that's why I like which is more important. All right, next up we have Mr. Motown. Now we're into the YouTube comments. And you want to leave comments on YouTube? I will talk about them now that I can do this a little bit more. I don't feel bad that the podcast is running long because this is all it is. And you don't like it, don't leave a comment. I'm sorry, please leave comments. I need them. Otherwise, I don't have a Tuesday podcast now. All right, so Mr. Motown says, always sounds for me. I can't watch anything unless it's in at least 5.1, even if it's nothing more than just an episode of The Simpsons. I love that point too. It's like even a good commercial. Have you ever heard a good commercial and you back it up if you've DVR'd it or whatever, and be like, wow, the mix on that was really nice. And it's like, what was that product? And that's why commercials run at a louder clip because sound is that important. It wakes you up. If the boring show you were watching put you to sleep, at least the commercial will wake you up. Next up, Theo M. Hi, great show. Thanks, Theo. He says it every week. I really appreciate that support. It's awesome because that's part of the YouTube. This is still on YouTube. That's part of the YouTube thing. It's like once you get going and it's anything, comments, any likes, stuff like that. But Theo, huge supporter of the show. Awesome. Thank you very much. So he says, hi, great show. I believe sound and image go together, but sound is more important than image. You are absolutely correct. They do go together. I didn't say which would I throw out. I said which is more important, and you nailed it. The sound is more important than image. Thank you for supporting my side of the argument. Doesn't mean it's guaranteed. So next up, we have MJ Bird says, I have not seen Terminator, the Predator movies, or the Rambo movies. I agree with you on sound. I collect film scores, and we have lots of good ones like Alan Silvestri, John Williams, James Horner, Hans Zimmer, Danny Elfman, and others. I have sheet music from Superman the movie my grandfather had framed on the wall. I can talk film scores all day long, and that's fantastic. I was like, that's awesome. I'm like, that's taking it to another level for sure. It's amazing how powerful sound is, and many take it for granted. And I think we do take it for granted nowadays. And then MJ Bird commented, I have not liked a movie before because I thought the film composer or song was not right for the movie. Very true. I have as well. Or maybe not the sound, but I have not liked movies because it didn't sound right. It didn't sound good. And then it's not, you might have loved the movie itself, but if it doesn't sound good, you're not watching it a lot. And again, I'll comment on more on that in a minute. Also commented, MJ Bird also said, Brightside Home Theater, I agree on the music, score, and effects. In animated movies, even the wrong voice actor can mess up a movie. Absolutely true. That's crazy. And it's true. It's like, that's how important it just, if you just don't feel it, it's just not the same. Mikey says, love and marriage go together like a horse and carriage. This I tell you, brother, meaning like you can't have one without the other. You need sound and picture. Mikey, you are absolutely right. We need both to have a movie because if you only have one, it's just a picture. And if you only have the other, it's an audio podcast or it's a radio show or something. But which is more important? You're absolutely right. We need both, but which is more important was the question. And next up, okay, so Craig Collins, picture, I watched says on Twitter, picture, I watched a film in theater with bad quality and great sound. then saw same movie at home in 4K and felt I hadn't seen the movie. So I saved this one for last for this subject. Craig Collins Images says this on Twitter. The only person to come in with picture as the most important. Thank you, Craig, for sending this in, because up until, this literally came in a couple hours before I sat down to record this podcast because everybody was saying sound, and I'm so happy somebody came in with picture. Not that I agree with them, but at the same time, I want contrasting opinions. And obviously, I don't know how many I just listed off there or how many people, it's whatever to one. But I found it funny that Craig Collins Images, that's his name on Twitter, and it's at Craig_Collins on Twitter, but his Craig Collins Images. He has images in his name. Of course, he's going to think picture. But what I will say to Craig is this. He's watched a film in theater with bad quality picture and great sound, but then he saw the same movie at home and felt he hadn't seen it. Well, yeah, you probably hadn't seen it, and that's bad quality picture. But how many times have you seen a movie and been like, and this is the one I wanted to get to, Thor Ragnarok. That has a great picture quality, absolutely great picture quality. It's so, the colors in that movie, it's so well shot, but it's the one everybody talks about that just doesn't sound very good. It's not a good pressing of the Blu-ray, and we just wish it had more, and you've got to punch this up. And it takes the rewatchability of that movie, and it's just tough to do because going in, you're like, this is so flat. I know the movie's good. I love the action. I love Chris Hemsworth. I love everything about the movie, but it just, it doesn't sound good. So, oh well. But how many times, Craig, have you watched a not so good movie because it had incredible sound, a la Hurricane Heist, like I said, and that does have a good picture too. But think of all the movies. Think of all the movies we watched just to get that experience of the sound in our rooms. And that was the last one. I had saved that. It literally came in a couple hours before I started recording. But, thank you guys all for the comments from last week. That was great. We'll move on. We got some more comments coming, but that was just all about last week's podcast. So thank you guys all for that. And Craig, really, thank you very much for supporting me like that and coming in with a dissenting opinion. Consenting opinion? No, dissenting. I can't. Words, not good for me. All right. Next up, we have my buddy Steve George at Legal Beagle OK. Thanks for the shout outs. As always, DJ, rest assured as regards to the follower that decided to unfollow, I have heeded your words and Disney's and let it go. So Steve had a follower that dropped him because of didn't agree with his theater thoughts and dropped him. That's so silly. Like I would be dropping Craig because he said, oh, well, I like picture. No, I want great discussions come from stuff like that. So, all right. This one here, Theo, replying to Todd Anderson. I had retweeted Todd Anderson at AVWoofer. He did a great write-up on the Kaleidoscape and awesome write-up on the whole Kaleidoscape system and everything like that. Check that out over there at AV Gadgets. Not AV Gadgets, that's Tom Andrew. But just go to at AVWoofer on Twitter, Todd Anderson, you can find it there. But anyways, Theo commented, hi, I would love to have this, but I just can't afford it, but I'd love for what it can do one day, he says. And I agree with him. I would love, that's why I work so hard at my Zapiti to get that to run like a Kaleidoscape, get that interface and get that. But the Kaleidoscape is it is gorgeous. It is a smooth system. And if you can afford one, I would definitely recommend one. I am working. Someday I will get there, but not right now. But yeah, so I agree with you, Theo. Someday, one day, maybe. Martin Anderson, hey, at BrightsideHT and at Arkham Comics, thanks for talking so much about Ted Lasso. We would never have jumped on it if it had not been for you guys. So Martin Anderson, one of my crossover listeners, commenting that me and my buddy John, that's at Arkham Comics, talking about Ted Lasso over on my other podcast on what a great show that is and how much fun we have with it. And so it got him to check it out. So, hey, you can't go wrong there. So I know I have a lot of crossover listeners. So thank you for that, Martin. All right. Next up, we have an email from Carl, and Carl sends me an email about a projector review for the 4K, the Sony VPL GTZ 380 4K SXRD laser projector review, and it comes in at a low price of $80,000. And then, of course, if you go to Projector Central, you can read all about the review yourself and the pros. The pros are spectacular. Highlights for SDR and HDR. World-class contrast for its brightness class. 100% DCI P3 gamut without filters and 3-chip LCOS native 4K architecture. And the cons, it's $80,000. But I would love to have a projector like this someday and attach it to my Kaleidoscape, and it would be great. And I bet you in 20 years, we'll have this projector, and it'll probably be $4,000. But can you imagine what that projector is going to be like? That's $80,000 20 years from now. It'll be like, passive 3D. It'll look fantastic, whatever. But awesome. I love getting that. I'm sure we'll hear about this week, or maybe we heard about it last week. I don't know, from the AV Rant or HT guys. All right, next up, Carl also sent a great link, and I will put this in the show notes. It's a YouTube page, a YouTube video, and it's from CBS Sunday Morning, and it's about John Williams' music. They did a whole entire piece, and I think after watching this, if I remember right, this is exactly where I talked about in last week's podcast that John Williams says to he says it in this video that Steven Spielberg, I'm not good enough for this project, you need somebody else. And Spielberg then says, yeah, I know somebody better, but they're all dead. So you're the best alive. And that's in this video. But it's a great piece. I think it's about 9 minutes long, and I'll have the link in the show notes to that one. It's a YouTube video, so check that one out. Movies and scenes this week. We have, let's see. Okay, WV Brew at BrightsideHT in HD on Amazon Prime. Would love to see in 4K, but looks fantastic. 5.1, very strong too, upmixed with Neural X. And he is talking about The Abyss. The Abyss, the best way you can see this movie right now, bar none, is on Amazon Prime. I've watched it. It looks really good, and it sounds really good. That's as far as I will go. It does not look great. I've seen great. This is not it. It does not sound great. It sounds good, or really good, but not great. I've heard great. This movie, if it needs to be remastered, it needs to have that touch. It needs somebody to go in and put the bass back in it where it's supposed to be so we can get it, because Amazon Prime, it's not giving it to you. I watched this movie, and since getting his tweet about this, and it looks fantastic, because I own the Blu-ray, I own the Laserdisc, not the Blu-ray, I'm sorry, I own the DVD, and I own the Laserdisc. And I can't play my Laserdiscs anymore, but the DVD doesn't look this good. This looks fantastic on Amazon Prime compared to the DVD, but we all know how good it could be. And the scenes underwater, when they're showing the lights on the submersibles under there, and the flashlights going, how good is that going to look in 4K? With the HDR, it's going to look fantastic. The detail we're going to be able to see is going to be great. And I just know that we're missing something with that. So I'm I can't say it looks awesome, but I can say it looks really good. And the sound, like I said, it needs the punch added back into it. I upped it 5 dB, and then I went and I upped my subwoofer by 4 dB. Still didn't have any visceral feel. It had no low rumbles in it, anything like that. I couldn't find anything, so I just stopped trying to manipulate. But it did sound good, and I enjoyed it, but we definitely need a 4K, or not even a 4K. Just put it out on Blu-ray with a nice mix. That's all I care. And Theo commented as well on Twitter. He said, "Hi, I am waiting with excitement for The Abyss as well." So look at that. And then WV Brew came back with, shortly after that, another recommendation at Brightside HT. This documentary is better than even the movie. Toughest film probably ever made. Wow. And what he's talking about is the documentary Under Pressure, Making the Abyss. And I can link this in the show notes. The only place I could find this one was on YouTube, and it's in 2 parts. It's an hour long, and on YouTube you get it's like 2 half-hour pieces. I will have links to both of those videos in the show notes. So if you want to check that out, I'm definitely going to check this out. I've watched a lot of the making of The Abyss. I love this movie. It needs more. We need to see the extended version. For those of you that don't know, that this is a very much, we need to save the planet type movie that really doesn't come across in the theatrical version, but in the extended version, it's what this movie is really about. It's about climate change and all of that. But it is I really enjoyed the extended version. It's a much better movie. There's a lot more answered. A lot of questions are answered that don't get answered when you're watching the theatrical version. But Under Pressure, Making the Abyss is the other movie to go along with the Abyss theme. But last up we have one from Carl, and he brings us Drive. And he said, he got this, his wife, he sent an email. He said, "My wife's September issue of Electronic Sound just arrived. Fantastic film. So crazy. It has now been 10 years. Gosh, she played the soundtrack all the time back in the day. This one is way overdue on 4K. So yeah, Drive, great movie. Highly recommended. Definitely check that one out. Funny that, talking about sound this week and how important, that is in the soundtrack of this movie. So good. So definitely check that one out. And that's all I have. It's only been a few days. Next week, we'll probably have a little more, but I probably won't. Hopefully, if you guys get over there onto YouTube and support #Dork and get them over 1,000, I won't have to do that. I won't have to do that plea next week, and the podcast will be just mostly all the listener comments and movies and scenes. So that'll do it for this week. Thank you to my 14 patrons. Thank you to everybody, because this particular podcast right here is about you guys. It's all about you guys. It's all about the conversations we're having about home theater. That's what I like to do. Let's talk home theater. Send in your questions, send in your comments, and we'll talk. I'm not going to answer questions about how to set up a home theater. We all know where to go for that. You can go to AV Rant and you can go to HD Guys. Those guys, but anything else like, hey, how about this movie? What do you think of this movie? I'll answer anything. Stuff like the bright side stuff, the stuff that's on the screen or that comes through our speakers. Which is more important? Let's not do that. Oh, let's do it again. All right, that's it. I'm rambling. Have a great week. Hey, I will see you on Friday. I have something special set up. I hope it still goes through, fingers crossed. But I will see you next week with a video and another podcast. So enjoy your week, everybody. Have a great time, and go push play. Hey, Fred. This has been a Hey Fred production, with theme music by Jeff Bernhardt and Throne Vault Productions.